I've pressed the record button.
Yep, and all ticking away.
We've got two things recording, so surely.
All right, here we go. So, first, hopefully easy question. I asked this one to Sue Jones yesterday, and she was like, I have no idea. How many years were you involved in the PPLP for Awards program?
Most probably about 12 years, but it wasn't called that when I first started. So
Yep.
It was much more informal. We've got people who are interested in going for an award. Can you help them? And it was very, it was really just working with people at a very low level, and then it started to evolve in a program.
Yep. And what year did you start as an actual mentor in that titled program?
Would have been 2006. In titled?
Yep.
Most probably whenever it first actually started. But 2006, straight after I won the national award.
Yep.
Because I was the first person to win a national award at UTAS. There was one other guy, but he sort of left not long after he won it. But I was the first, or certainly the first Tasmanian.
Yep.
And as a result of that, Gail Hart, who was there at the time, the PVC teacher, she would basically say, we've got people interested in applying, why don't you talk to Colin? And just that connection, because I was on the teaching learning committee for the university, and it was just the connection just kept getting made. And then other people would come on board, they might go and talk to Sue, or they might go and talk to someone else.
Yep. And so can you describe your role in the official program and how you kind of moved into that program and what your role was in it?
Yeah, I think part of the role was really trying to get to open people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than getting them to sort of think about themselves as, I have to document myself for a process, actually trying to take them backwards and ask them to think about who they are and what their motivations are, what their orientations are, how they would build a narrative around introducing themselves to other people. So rather than, looking at it almost quantitatively like you would research and sort of saying, well, these are my outcomes. It's almost like trying to bring this qualitative and individualistic approach to getting people to realise that we all didn't have to follow the one route towards documenting these things, that we actually had to try and find ourselves. And I think in some ways that was very rewarding, but it was also very challenging, because obviously once you're not doing it in a faculty. So if you're just doing it in a social science-based faculty, then that's most probably easier in one sense. But once someone who teaches, engineering or medicine, or, I shouldn't label stuff like that, because obviously there's some, incredibly reflective people who we know from those faculties.
Yeah.
But there are some sort of stereotyped people who are very good at education, but have never really reflected on why they're good.
Yeah. And so when you were working with those people, were you one of the group that came through in twos in the first instance? Did you work with another mentor for the first year or two, or every year?
Yeah, I think the way it actually worked is the very first year that it started, I was actually a candidate.
Oh, yep. Okay.
Right. And so therefore, I wasn't able to be the very first year it was run. So I was doing it unofficially. Then I had an application in for maybe a vice chancellor's teaching excellence type thing.
Yep.
And so therefore they said, okay, so you're going to be mentored. And it was Justin who actually mentored. And I actually quite enjoyed that, because I've, been the mentor, and I had an opportunity to become the mentee.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool. And then the way that worked was when I joined it, rather than joining it as straight up the guy who was running a group, I then joined in with from music.
Heather.
I then joined Heather, and so while I was the sort of apprentice to her, but then she didn't treat me like that anyway. She said, "Oh, you must really know more about this than me." But I respected the fact that the students students, that the applicants were seeing it ranked that way or hierarchy. So I just sort of played that role. And then I think the following years after that, it was sort of like I was either by myself with someone else, or we had someone join us.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yep. And what was your motivation for participating in these roles?
Well, there's mostly a lot of different motivations. There's a lovely saying by Isabel Allende, the Chilean author, and she says it's through spending yourself that in order to become rich, you need to spend yourself. And when I first came across that saying, when I think about my orientation to most things in life is wanting to help people.
Yeah.
And so you might muck that up, like with your kids. You might overstep the boundaries of, telling them what they have to do type thing. But I've always wanted, whether it's my neighbours or whatever, so I always wanted to help people. Yeah. And I felt very privileged to have won the award that I got in 2005. Even before that, I'd already been helping people at a school level who've been asking me questions. I remember before I won that award, someone in another school asked me to give them, they thought, well, you're very innovative in what you do. Could you give me some advice? And it was more about how to not be scared of doing something, really, rather than what should I do?
Yeah.
How do I overcome the fear of doing something,
Yeah.
So I've always just had a natural disposition towards wanting to help people. So I think it just fitted in, quite nicely with that. I'm also incredibly passionate about teaching and learning and the scholarship of teaching and learning. And so I think it was just a natural expression of that, and you work in an area where there's always a bit of pushback in relation to that passion. So if you can find little puddles to go and get wet in where people are actually interested in that conversation, then that's a lot of positive energy that you're getting back from people too. And across the journey, every time someone wins an award, I just had it up here at QUT where one of my colleagues was going for a national citation, and I read through her application and I just said to her, and it actually reminded me very much of Emma's application from in the past, and I said to her, you're not in this, so descriptive. And she said, I was told to write it like that. And I said, well, you can do that, but if I was reading this as a judge, as I wouldn't warm to it, right? But I know what you do, and I know how passionate you are, and what an advocate you are for this. Why don't you tell me that? And she went and wrote it. And whether that was the reason she won, who knows? You could never know. But she was very happy that she, came and said thank you for that advice, and because that was what she wanted to do all along, but she was told not to do it.
Yeah, wow.
So I think just being in that space and I think understanding the value of recognition, because having pushed some limits in my own school contexts, when you do get recognised, it's so important. It gives you breathing space, it gives you some legitimacy.
Yeah.
That anyone who's innovative and passionate about what they do should couple that with seeking recognition as almost a safeguard in the first place. And then in the second place, they get the benefit that they've been able to engage in a highly reflective process, which should help them to actually understand why they do what they do anyway.
So it's a good fit all around.
Yeah.
So this question's been confusing people. I've been trying to figure out a good way to phrase it. But what I'd like to know is, during your time as a PPLP for Awards mentor, did your substantive role change at all? Did you go from one level to the next in terms of promotion? Did you get different leadership roles within the school? Did you move to different places? Like, was there anything that shifted in your role itself?
No, not really. I think I for the majority of that time, I would have been a senior lecturer, and for a whole range of reasons, I was never a part of school or faculty teaching and learning committees or given any other role in teaching and learning.
Yeah, okay.
And so in some ways, that most probably, you could add this back into the previous question, this role also provided me with an opportunity to actually have a role in teaching and learning.
Yeah, okay, yep.
At a university level, that the sort of stuff that I was actually denied access to because I was seen as too progressive and too much of a sort of troublemaker.
Yep.
The school wanted, and faculty didn't want me on their committees. So.
Yep. Okay. And what about your role in AIC? Was that it?
Yeah.
No, AIRC.
Research.
Was that during that time, or was that prior to?
Yeah, but that was really just a sideways shift in terms. It was really just moving me from one. My job didn't change. I still taught entrepreneurship. I still did research.
Okay.
It was really just where I was based.
Yep.
Yeah. So nothing really changed in that sense.
Yep. Okay. And did you meet any new staff at the institution while you were participating in PPLP for awards?
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Do you have a guesstimate number of how many that would have been?
Well, it'll be more than 20, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. And could you describe if so, how any of those new relationships influenced your practice as an academic?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I'll give you an example with, say, Heather Monkhouse. When I first met her, and when I'm working with students, I put a great deal of emphasis on failure. And that's not a normal narrative in higher education, because we want people to succeed, right? And people want to avoid failure. And I'm trying to get them to embrace it and become comfortable with it. And I was having a conversation with her about this, and it was actually her application for something, right? And in her application, she talked about how she wanted her students to embrace failure. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And it was, when you try to learn to play a musical instrument, you're going to be rubbish, to start with. So you have an expectation. I hear this on the radio. I would like to be this good. That's what I'm going to imitate. That I want to motivate. That's what motivates me. But actually, I'm only this good.
Yeah.
And so it's by embracing your failure to be this good that enables you to understand where you're at. So failure is a way of actually benchmarking where you're at, and it's the step that enables you to understand what you've got to do to get to the next step and the next step. So her view was, if I can't get my students to have a reality check in terms of their inability to get where they want to go, and so it's through embracing failure that this could happen. And so that's just one example of where someone from an entirely different context tells you something. Another one from medicine would be, in medicine, they have a thing called, let's see how good my memory is here. Anyway, it's a structured clinical examination. So what does the O stand for? It's called OSCE.
Oh, the OSCEs.
Yeah, it's called something structured clinical examination. The guy who created, his name was Oski, but that's OSKI.
Yep.
But the O is something clinical.
Simulated clinical.
Yeah, something anyway. So that was a really cool thing. We didn't actually ever do it formally, but we used to use that as a bit of a practice to say to students, at the end of this course, you should be able to go to these 5 different stations, and you should be able to demonstrate to each other that you're capable of doing these things.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, we're always pinching ideas from somewhere, and, and same sort of thing with other people from other faculties overseas, lots of things from arts.
Yep.
The process of subjective marking, when you look at someone's artwork that's hanging on the wall, how do you, what's the objective process for that? So, in short, yes, because I think that's most probably the sad thing that's missing, is that too many things happen within a faculty. And I remember people who wanted to seek recognition at a university level or even higher. They were being told to see a particular person in my faculty, someone I wasn't particularly, didn't get on with very well. And this person had never received any form of teaching recognition. I don't even know if they had ever even written an application to seek it. And yet they were the ones that were there to guide. So not only was it a lost opportunity for the applicant in terms of getting hopefully really good advice, but we weren't exposing those people to people in other faculties.
Yeah.
I remember Justin, when I was working with him, he had that whole this is the claim, this is the impact, this is the evidence.
Yeah.
I used to have this is the claim, this is the evidence. And I never really talked up the impact side.
Ah, okay. Yep.
The way he sort of had this little 3-box trick thing happening for every little section of his application, I thought that's pretty cool because it really laid out very neat.
Yep.
So when you get those interfaculty friendships and interactions happening, just different set of eyes, different ways of doing things, and most probably more important, if you think about that one with failure, a different type of legitimacy around something that may not be overly legitimate in our context, but is already legitimate somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah,
so
absolutely.
We might say, oh, we want the marking process to be objective, and yet someone in art says, no, it's going to be pretty subjective.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just going to look at what you've done, and I'm going to,
Huh?
I
don't like it. I like it.
And so that's a really powerful thing when you've got to justify something, and you can say, well, this is actually accepted practice at the university, just not in the school.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Has your participation in PPLP for awards contributed to your understanding of institutional needs or priorities in learning and teaching?
It's an interesting question. I suppose it makes you more aware of where priorities might get developed, I most probably always saw myself operating at a level slightly below that in terms of, I'm in this thing because I really want to help the applicant.
Yep.
And if we help the applicants, then the university gets a benefit from that for recognition. But how the university may have been constructing that narrative, that strategic process, most probably wasn't always something that I was connected to. If you're in your area, maybe you were, but I was most probably someone who was almost like the hired gun. You're calling in, you're using in that sense, but not in a we want to design something from the ground up type thing. It's most of you. We've already got an idea we want to plug you into.
Yep. Yeah, I like the hired gun analogy. I think that's we called you were probably one of about 3 or 4 or 5 that were our usual suspects. We are on our speed dial at Tilt, but yeah, I can imagine that a hired gun would be suitable for a number of number of things. What do you think were the keys to success of your time as a mentor in PPLP for awards? And that can either be in relation to your own role as a mentor, or it can be the success of the groups that you worked with.
I think 2 things. It's actually like there's a micro level, a meso level, and a macro level. And I think if you look at it at a macro level, when we had workshops where we brought in 20 people, that was most probably a good way of really being able to move a bunch of people forward enough to sort of, I do want to think about this. I do want to engage in this, and and hit a topic for them like teaching philosophies, where they may not have really spent a lot of time, and you were able to get a fair bit done with quite a few people. So that I thought that was quite effective. And then obviously if you met someone for coffee and you were working with them at an individual level, at a micro level, I thought that was very effective, right? Because if they're going to turn up and have the coffee with you, chances are they actually want to be there, and they're invested into it, right? So that's okay. At the meso level, that's where I actually never really felt like it worked as well, and that was like where you got into that team. So Heather and I might be sitting down and we're waiting for our 3 or 4 people that have been assigned to us, and only one turns up.
Yeah, yeah.
Or only 2, or we ask them to send us a draft, and the drafts just sort of turn up. So it's almost like at a level of information and sort of getting people to sort of really sort of open their minds to a different way of thinking about things or framing what's possible, you could be very effective there. And at a one-to-one level, you could be very effective there. And then there was this other level, which was mostly the more planned level, in terms of, okay, now you're in the system, we're going to move you through these stages. And I think it was the stages which made it not particularly effective, because it's just hard for people's lives. You know, they've got something happening at home. They've got, you know, busy semester. Maybe they're on other committees, and so it's easy to sort of say, oh, well, if you can't get it done, that's okay. We can put you through into the next round and something like that. But there was just a sort of like, it was a discontinuous. It didn't seem to flow. And so you walked away sort of thinking, well, I made myself available, not 100% sure whether that actually really was good use of everyone's time.
Yep.
Whereas at the top end and at the bottom end, you know, it was almost like, that was fantastic. You know, there's a contribution to being made.
Yep. Much clearer. So that's kind of answered the next question, which is, what do you think were the biggest challenges to the success in this role or in those groups? Do you want to add anything to that response, though?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is trust. It's very, very hard to get somebody to, and we sort of always would sort of talk about that, you know, if you do your research, you don't get a real lot of scope to really define that domain. You know, it's like, what's your Google Scholar thing look like? What journals have you published in? You know, everything's sort of defined for you. You either measure up or you don't. But getting people to actually appreciate that in their teaching and learning space, they can actually frame that, you know, in terms of their own strengths and their history and a whole range of things. That's most probably the hard thing. If you can get through there, if you can get people to sort of say, oh, really? So I can actually, you know, do this to suit myself. I think that's the problem you get when you get these small groups. It just doesn't seem to be as intimate.
Yep.
You can be more intimate when you're talking about general processes, rather than when you bring it back to, okay, now we need you to move from here to here.
Yeah, okay.
One-to-one, it can be very intimate, and it's almost like, I get what you're saying. But when you get 4 or 5 people in the room, it's almost like there's a reduction to the process rather than an expansion of the individual.
Yep. Do you feel that your participation in PPLP for awards has contributed to the institution or any specific institutional goals or initiatives?
Absolutely. I mean, I think obviously there's obviously a goal that the ranking of the university will be viewed externally based on how many people have received awards. So I think we were successful in collectively getting people to keep that process moving forward. I also think it created, not necessarily deliberately, but just through the natural curiosity of things, it created communities of practice that where people actually said, you know, I do enjoy catching up with you. Let's do that. And I think of something like Kerry House's book club, right? And how that sort of just became a natural offshoot of people who were coming together. And again, you talk about your usual suspects. Well, it really was the usual suspects attending things like that. So it sort of created more activity around that space. So I think that that's a bit hard, because I mean, obviously, then I'm not sure what the connection strategically would then be for the little grants, $500 grant.
The peer learning circles, yep.
Yeah, the peer learning circles. I'm not sure if they were designed to prime this sort of activity that would then lead, you know, they're right back at the beginning of that process. But I think, yes. But then I look at it and I think, but, you know, ultimately, does it? You know, did it change? Was there actually any desire for it to change the culture at the university? I don't know if that was the desire, or really just to get the cream recognised and get the cream, you know, interacting and becoming better. You know, I mean, the citations clearly creates an opportunity for more people to be recognised than what would ever have been years ago, you know. So that means you've got a potentially wider group of people you can be interacting with. So the answer is yes, but there's most probably maybe a disconnect between that, what really was the strategic desires versus what, it's not like everyone who was a part of it was like, okay, this is the plan,
Yep.
this is the role, and this is what we want to achieve.
Yep.
It was really just a part of the puzzle.
Yeah. Yep. No, that makes sense. And the depth of achievement is probably a little bit more questionable than the actual tick box level of achievement. Yep. So do you meet with any of the participants from your PPLP for Awards groups or the broader mentor network still? And I know that's a little bit of a challenging question because of the distance, but I guess you can kind of think about that from the time that you ended participation in the program through to now. So even times that you were still at UTAS is fine to reflect on.
Yeah, I think it created easier interaction if you saw someone around the uni.
Yep.
So rather than walking past someone and thinking, oh, I know that person, you should have created that. I mean, I had coffee with Kerry House weeks ago when she was up here doing some stuff. And can't comment on it obviously now. I most probably feel quite disappointed that there's not a natural curiosity to want to be part of a teaching and learning scholarship group.
Yep.
I need to get recognition. I better come and be a part of something. Makes sense. But what about just the general curiosity that, exists in that space? So I remember there was one question I asked everybody. If everyone in the room, we were talking about teaching philosophies, everyone had to write down 6 theorists or philosophers whose names would help us to understand your approach, who could write down 6? And I think 1 out of 20 people put their hand up. And we brought it back to, who could write down 2? Then we might have got another couple of hands. So I just did something very similar at QUT just recently. I'm now the chair of the Teaching and Learning Committee in my school. And I offered to start a teaching and learning scholarship group. And, the feedback was quite amazing, really. Some very critical people. How does this affect my workload model and, all this sort of stuff. And all I was actually saying was, if you're interested in this,
why
don't we actually get together and have a chat, over a coffee and, so there's most probably something missing, I think, in general.
Yep.
But it's great that people come together for recognition, but it'd be nice if that ultimately became a more, so I don't know, the little peer learning grants, I think that's the right idea.
Yep.
It's like, how might you just sort of create something which is almost like not exclusive in any sense, but it means something on a Tuesday morning to go down and have a coffee with a group of people, because, so I think there's a gap.
Yeah.
Everyone feels overworked, underappreciated. Why should I waste my time? But I think that's the low-hanging fruit. Finding those conversations and having conversations with people about this and being curious about things.
And look, that is one of the things that's coming out of this research, is trying to answer that question, what am I going to get out of this?
Yeah.
And sometimes the answer is as simple as a good conversation that will potentially make your week. Is that good enough? Because often that is the one thing when you go home on the weekend that you look back and you remember about the experience from the week. So it's where does that sit on the validation scale for people and universities? That's really what I'm thinking through in this space.
Yeah, look, I can there's a lot of people that I think appreciated my energy, but they mostly didn't have an hour to satisfy my curiosity. Every time I might meet someone, I want to talk to them. And there would be other people that are as curious, about things, and it just doesn't seem to have as much a priority. Because I think part of it is that we do research, but we administer teaching.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that's a bit of a challenge. Like, we don't administer a paper. I have to administer a paper, right? We do it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, next semester you've got that subject.
Yeah.
You administer it. Now, for the people who don't see themselves administering it, and they see themselves as actually trying to create value in that space, and they're curious about it, and they're fascinated by the ups and downs of the process, there's mostly not enough conversation that naturally happens around that. And that's because a lot of colleagues, they're just something they administer.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when the CRA came in, I was the champion in my school, and I sat down. I'd been using CRA since 2001, and I got in trouble for it a lot because I had skewed marking and people using beautiful, norm referenced moderated types of curves and things. And then when it came in, I said to the school meeting, I said, this will require a fair bit of change for us to adopt this. And someone said those exact words. They said, I think this is something that we can administer fairly easily. And I said, this is a philosophical shift in the way we think about assessment and how we actually communicate assessment before and after with students. Yeah. And they just viewed it purely as an administrative issue.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the cruxes around how you get things to move on. It's almost like someone's been administering something and now we want to give them recognition for their administration, but we're going to call it scholarship. So some people have genuinely been engaged in that scholarship the whole time, but how do you actually get them to come together and actually be a part of something that's not for reward? It's just for their curiosity. That's my litmus test, basically, is curiosity.
Yeah,
I meet somebody and they're not curious about their teaching and they're not curious about their research, well, then I know that I don't really want to talk to them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Should be. Yeah, I mean, people can be busy, but at some point they must be curious. They should be curious about something.
Yeah. Something should be driving that busyness.
There, it's.
Yeah. So you've touched on this. I'm wondering if your participation in the program contributed to any changes in your own teaching practice, and if it had any impact on your students' learning or overall experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's not about, is there a practice that I found? It's just that I went deeper and into reflection, and the cycle of reflection was never ending. So rather than saying, oh, okay, I'm happy with what I do, just being exposed to other people's thinking and reading their applications and talking to them about their approach, I think if you are curious, it just leaves little pebbles in your own shoes. You find yourself walking away from a meeting thinking, that's pretty cool how they do that. That would actually solve the problem I've got, or that would actually help my students. So I think just being inside that process just creates more moments for reflection in terms of your own learning. So you may do something that's really the natural extension of where you were, but you got to that point quicker because you were much more cycling through that reflection than if you'd really just been by yourself. You might find something externally that you bring in by talking to someone, but you might just simply move things forward. You might have just more curiosity to solve a problem that you can see how someone else has solved it. Someone else had a large class and they were doing something, and you thought, wow, if I did that, or something like that, I could actually do this experiential exercise with my 200 students too. Assuming that was too many students. So.
Yep. So a bit of freedom in that then. Yeah. And what about your engagement with teaching as a scholarly activity? Has that changed at all since your participation in the program?
It has, and most probably. Well, I'll give you an example, which is most probably an extreme example. Liverpool John Moores University in Liverpool, I've been working with them closely over the last 3 years. They've developed an enterprise academy, And the Enterprise Academy is essentially PPL type thing, but for papers rather than purely recognition across the entire university. And so I've done several workshops with the staff there, which have been sort of credited as bringing people out of the woodwork. People are like, wow, I didn't think we could think about our teaching and learning like that, and I want to be a part of this type of thing. So, I'll be back there in a few weeks' time doing more work with the staff there. And so I do a lot of work. In January, I'll be back in the Scottish Entrepreneurship Educators Program. So a lot of work teaching the teachers. So, how, I'm writing a book at the very moment, How to Teach Entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And I've written obviously other books on teaching entrepreneurship. And I think being engaged in something like this program just builds up your foundation of confidence.
Yep.
Right. So if it's a one-off, if it's just like can you talk to somebody?
Yeah.
That's something. But if you're continually engaging with people and people are continually saying, oh, thanks very much for that. That was really useful. I really appreciate it. That's a different perspective. I'm not going to go down that route, but it was really interesting to think it through that way, or whatever the case may be. Then I think you end up with this really pretty strong foundation that you've got something to offer. You can't solve everyone's problem. The context they're in will always be problematic for, transferring ideas and things. But you've got a confidence that's been built up as a result of it through being a part of this process.
Yep.
To be honest with you, I haven't found the teaching context globally that's that much different. I mean, people are still under pressure. The difference between their motivations and how they're being measured, and the needs of their students, and the learning styles of their students. All those things are sort of quite mished up and mashed everywhere.
Yeah.
There's no like, oh, it's just so nice to go and teach here. I mean, even at QT, I have, for the first time in my life, I'm teaching students who have a unit with me as compulsory.
Yeah, okay.
So practically every unit I ever taught at UTAS was elective, in that you either chose to do the entrepreneurship major and therefore you got me, or you did the units as elective units.
Yeah.
So most of those people that heard something, oh, the entrepreneurship's like this, Colin's like that. So most of the people who walked in the door were like, oh yeah, no, we know what we're here for.
Yeah.
But at QT, I've got 350 students in my class at the moment.
Yeah, wow.
And maybe 50 to 100 of those students, they do not want to be there.
Yeah.
And I teach on Saturdays, and that's even worse, right?
Yep.
What are we doing here for on a Saturday?
Yeah.
So this whole sort of process helps you to sort of just build up a lot of confidence about what you're capable of.
Yeah.
And as Kerry Howells would say, I think it builds up a lot of mindfulness. So the Japanese and the Chinese have this notion of the open mind. So if I'm talking to you today, I'm not going to allow whatever conversations we've had in the past to determine the assumptions I make.
Yep.
I'm going to try and bring things back to a nice open space, and we just move forward from there. Yep. Doesn't mean that I don't remember all the nasty things you've said about me in the past, but they don't have to influence the nature of this conversation.
Yep.
I think that mindfulness of when you sit down with another educator, of thinking, well, you may have been recognized and you may have been successful helping someone else to achieve recognition of the thing, but that doesn't mean you understand their context.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that you're instantly going to be able to help them. You need to just keep an open mind and understand who they are. And so I think that type of challenge is like a constant thing. But if you know that process awaits you, then you can be even more confident in saying to someone, well, I'm sure if we take the time to sit down and have a conversation, that I can help you, right? Because I think I can help most people if I understand their context, I understand their motivations, I understand all those other factors that sort of come into play in relation to what they do.
Yep. Okay, cool. And willing to sit down and listen to it, which is good.
Yeah.
Okay, so for this next question, I'm going to read out a list of different activities. And if you could say whether or not you have participated more, less, or to no changing extent in these activities since you've been a PPLP for Awards mentor.
And you want me to do them one at a time as you go through?
Yep. So more, less, or to no changing extent.
More, less.
Or no changing extent.
No change. Yeah, okay.
Yep. So applying for teaching grants.
More.
Okay. Writing subtle publications.
More.
Implementing teaching innovations.
Same. No change.
Designing, reviewing, or renewing curricula.
No change.
Engaging with your discipline.
More.
Engaging with the broader institutional community.
More.
Engaging with the broader higher education sector.
I think no change.
Yep. Engaging with the broader community outside of higher education.
More.
And taking on leadership roles in your institution or discipline.
Yeah, more.
More. Okay. So I'll read that list again, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate on any of those that you feel have been positively impacted on by your participation in PPLP for Awards.
Yeah.
So that was teaching grants, subtle publications, teaching innovations, engaging with curricula, engaging with your discipline, the broader institutional community, higher education sector, the broader community, or taking on leadership roles.
Yeah, so you can just jog me as we go through them.
Yep.
Teaching grants, I think just by becoming part of that networking process, you're more likely to find yourself on a teaching grant because people, your skills, your area of expertise is known to more people.
Yep.
And so you're more likely to get a phone call, hey, we're doing something in this space. Do you want to be a part of it? So I think you find yourself naturally getting onto things more.
Yep. Publications, subtle publications.
Yeah. I mean, I've been increasingly publishing more scholarship of teaching and learning papers. And that's whether it's motivated as a result of that participation or simply by the engagement I have with the international community.
Yep.
So I've moved really from thinking about I'm going to do some research on my students to actually people are interested in my opinion. So I'm more in my world. Not that many people. We write about entrepreneurship education, but most people don't write about education.
Yep.
So the fact that I write about education tends to make my work, even if it's more of an opinion, conceptual type of thing, it makes it relatively interesting to people because there's a framework related to the thinking.
Yep. Yep. Teaching innovations.
I think I've always been doing that really from, I might be getting better at it or worse at it or whatever the case is, but I'm always open to shopping and changing things. So I don't think that's changed a great deal.
Yep. Engaging with designing, reviewing, or renewing curricula.
Yeah, I don't always, at the unit level, sure, but not really at the curriculum level. Most probably, when I was at UTAS, one of my dear head of schools took away the major and tried to find ways of taking me out of that process. At QT, I am connected to things, but still very much at the unit level.
Yep. Engaging with your discipline.
I think that's the same. I don't think that's changed a lot.
Yep. Engaging with the broader institutional community.
Or maybe I did that. Did I say that way around? Did I say I had done more with my discipline?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, more with discipline, not with institutional.
Yeah, and that's most probably feeds back into that, just that general confidence. I get invited to talk at a lot of conferences and things like that. And while I don't have the money that I used to have, so I used to be able to say yes to a lot of things, I still get to a few things. And so that level of engagement is still up there. In terms of the institution, did I say yes to that?
No. You said no changing extent.
Okay. Yeah. That's most probably true, although I am doing more at the moment at QUT.
And would that in any way be related to your participation in PPLP for awards?
I think it's about that springboarding that you gain from it.
Yep.
To being recognised for it as such.
And
although what I would say is the extension to what I now do is I'm in the process of hopefully about to get principal fellow, and I'm senior fellow with HEA at the moment.
Yep.
So I've done 4 rounds of reviewing with that.
Yeah.
Very engaged in that, which is something I hadn't thought about as we're going through. So it's not that, but it's something.
Yep. In that same vein. Yep. And then the other ones were with the broader higher education sector and then the broader community outside of the higher education sector.
Yeah, and so I find myself interacting with high schools and just someone, where's this guy? There's a guy who I'm just in the process of doing some work with, David Yu, and he's the CEO of a college in Australia. And they've just taken my ideas and they're building their college based on my approach to entrepreneurship education.
Yeah, wow.
Across all their Australian campuses. So that's quite interesting because I didn't go to him in the first instance and say, you should do it this way. They've read my work. And I met him the other day and he said, I can't believe I met you. And now we're going to start doing more work with him. The tricky bit, of course, is I can't be a consultant to them because that's a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
I'm having a meeting with my head of school next week to try and get her to sign off on me doing action research.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Research process around these issues. So I'm hopeful that'll. Yeah. It's too good an opportunity. You know, when someone says, "Oh, we're designing our college around your way of thinking," that's not something that happens every second day.
No. And universities don't deal very well with things that don't happen every second day. They're not sure about those processes. And then the last one was on the taking on leadership roles in your institution or discipline. Has PPLP for awards impacted that in any way?
What did I say?
You said yes.
Yeah, so that'd be, I think, again, it's this being recognised. So, and most probably when I went to do the HEA, I got the senior fellow pretty easily because of my demonstrated mentoring of other people.
Yep.
And now I'm heading off to principal fellow. Once I get the principal fellow, then I'll have a much greater leadership role as a result. So I think there's a natural progression in relation to those things. You know, you're working in that program. At this end, it almost gifts you the mentor-based senior fellow in HEA because you've done everything they're really wanting you to do, which then if you've got enough other leadership capacities, which I hopefully can demonstrate, you can get to principal, which I think we have 340 fellows, HEA fellows at QT.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the most outside England.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so, and I think there's 15 principal fellows. So it's not an easy...
No, it's a pretty big jump.
You know, if you've been doing this sort of stuff, but then to be able to demonstrate the leadership is most probably not easy. So hopefully I can make the case. We'll
yeah.
Find.
Oh, cool. We've had enough training. So that kind of answers the next question. Has your participation in PPLP for awards been positive, neutral, or negative to your career progression?
It's been very positive because it's an altruistic experience. You know, no one says we'll give you money, although I think from time to time there is something you get.
A little bit. Muffins.
Yeah. But no one's going to do it for that. And certainly, I mean, someone might, but I mean, in my case, I was generally getting more than enough money, so I didn't have a motivator. In fact, factor there. There's an altruistic thing which I think people who've either got recognition or like seeing get recognition want to be a part of it. And I think, you know, that sort of what goes around comes around type of karma type thing sort of seems to sit in this space, and it's almost like the good guys are in there. I didn't, to be honest with you, I didn't feel like I was ever exposed to a lot of politics. Even when I was sitting on the panels that decided the ranking order of, you know, citations and things, Yeah, you might get a little bit. That's my ex-PhD student. I really want to stick up for that person.
Yeah, yeah.
Get a little bit of this, but nothing too overt. And it was really just a sense of pride that
Yep.
we had people in the institution who we could be proud of and who are doing positive things. And in a sense, a degree of sadness that we could recognise that inside this program, but it just couldn't naturally flow on. And when I won that Australian Teaching Award, because I was the first person, they put my face on the website. It was in the newspaper, front page of the newspaper. It was in the website for a year. And up until the time I left, I would be walking around the university and people would say to me, "Kelly Collin," and I'd be going, "Who is that?"
Yeah.
Right? And because I'm obviously not the brightest person, quite a while to actually work out, why do people know who I robbed a bank and I don't know about it? And then eventually someone must have said something like it, like, it took a year for them to take your face down off the front of the thing. And
Yeah, the website.
I never looked at the front page of I had no reason to go to the front page of I already knew where my school was on the,
Yeah, yeah.
So I was sort of almost oblivious to it. But I feel sad because I think, well, that was nice, but everybody who's doing a good job, whether they've been recognised or not, should be getting some form of adulation, some form of recognition, some form of status that sort of says, I'm a fantastic, because, if somebody's got a H value, a H index value of 40 on Google Scholar, they can walk around like they're the king or the queen of Sheba, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't actually matter if they abuse people or they got an H index of 40. So
yeah. Get out of jail free card.
But it's not easy to get recognition for teaching. It's not an easy process in terms of it, like at a national level. So it's competitive. So lots of good people don't get recognised. But how do we actually say, well, regardless of that, we think you're fantastic? So there's lots of people who have an H index of 40 who'll never get an award for their research, because maybe other people in their field have got 100, right? But we just we say, wow, you must be pretty bloody good because you've got 40.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's something missing there for
in the middle.
Yeah.
So that the next question was around job satisfaction, which I think that's probably what you just addressed. Was there anything in the actual progression of your career, like you talked about going from fellow to senior fellow to now hopefully principal? Was there anything else that the program participation contributed to in career progression?
Well, I would say in terms of career satisfaction, in the first instance, it was a bit like an oasis.
Yep.
I used to call Kerry's book reading sessions therapy, and there were people there that would be in tears, right?
Yeah.
Their experiences inside their schools.
Yeah.
And when I had an opportunity to walk from my corridor down the hill and come and sit in a session with people, it was like I was getting away from stuff that really annoyed me, and I was able to do something that really gave me satisfaction. So even if it didn't lead to you getting a promotion, the fact that you're actually engaged in an activity that was really, really enjoyable, nice. Then I would definitely say, as I said to you, it definitely, I think, has definitely been something I've been able to draw attention to and say, hey, I not only participated in this, and I can not only point to people's quotes where people have said, thanks so much for helping with this. It's great that who've won and gained some recognition from something. But that whole process of mentoring is something you can then draw upon to then use as you are demonstrating with things like HEA. And I think that's a pretty cool thing, because like QUT, they'll pay for you. They'll pay for the cost of you going to principal fellow if you can make the case that you are able to succeed at getting it.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? And so you actually have to put an expression of interest in. And if you can show that you've got something that it looks like if it was written up the right way with the right evidence that it should get supported, they'll back you. You don't have to pay anything,
Okay.
right? And otherwise, they would have, you can imagine with 340 people, they would have a bunch of people say, I'll have a crack at that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't have any problems at all in being able to get that. The feedback I got was not a problem at all. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Go
looks all
for it.
looks really good for you. And I think all of that activity stems from being a part of these types of scholarly things.
Yep. Yep. It gives you more of a validated foundation as opposed to just, yeah, I can do this. I can reflect. I can mentor. I can do these things. But yep. Yep.
Yeah, because I think even if I remember someone who was working at the uni, and they were there in a role to help people in this sort of regard. And when people would get recognition, this particular person used to get quite upset. Like he was, I won't say he, they seemed to be living vicariously through every application, right? It was almost like, well, if that person gets a recognition, that really means I get recognition, right?
Yep.
And I think that really blew my mind because it's like, you know, it's not like a PhD where you thanked people at the start of it. You know,
Yeah.
there's no acknowledgement to pay. It really is about the person, and then you step back from it, right? And you've given something. You know, you don't need your children to walk around the streets every day saying, "I'm so lucky that my mother or father helped me to do this." I mean, it's
Yeah.
you've had a hand, right? So, yeah, I think the whole process of actually helping,
Yeah.
and you get the reward if you do a good job, and it all gets collected somewhere else down the line.
Yeah. Yeah. The last kind of lens in terms of the impact that the program might have had on your experiences in academic, can you comment on whether or not it had any impact on your professional growth?
Yeah, I think so, because in my case, my teaching practice is largely based on a process of vulnerability. So I need my students to become vulnerable to be able to enter a transformational learning space where they ultimately see themselves differently, and then as a result are able to see their environment, the world they are interacting with, differently. So they're not as blindsided to themselves and the world they want to interact with. So that's my challenge. And to do that, I sometimes play the fool or someone who doesn't look like a serious educator. Even though I am, I have to find ways to become vulnerable to the students so that they'll become vulnerable back to me. So there are lots of myths about my teaching and my approach to teaching, and they find they can already have them happening at QUT, right? And so I'm not always seen as being the most professional person, right? Almost like he just loves a laugh, this guy. He just wants to have a joke, right? And so I think being engaged in these types of processes enables you to bring back a veneer of professionalism to what you do, right? And so for some people, they already have that. So you mentioned Sue before. Well, I'm sure Sue already has this veneer, right?
Yep.
And but in my case, I don't want that when I'm actually a practitioner. When I'm actually the educator, I don't want to be seen as, oh, we have to respect this person. Or I actually want this thing to be really unpredictable and sort of almost out of control, right? To achieve what I want to achieve. So this type of program and engagement with it, it's almost like, well, you must do something well or understand the space or actually have the ability to have a sensible conversation somewhere along the line if you're actually a part of this. It's almost like a writing the perceptions type of thing. It's almost like I do hear weird things, but they can't all be crazy because you are a part of this, right?
Yeah.
And and I don't shy away from that. I'm very happy to be just me.
Yep. Yep.
You know, and me is always going to have a joke with people, right?
Yeah.
I was in a meeting, to give an example, I was in a meeting the other day with a whole bunch of very senior people, and I was trying to get them to think about the difference between education and training. And I was telling them that the problem we've got is there's an overemphasis on training, which is called education, and we should be really thinking about education. And a couple of people mentioned, they said, I'm not so sure this is really a big deal. And I said, well, can you understand what I'm saying? I do understand what you're saying, but I don't really see it's a big deal. And I said, okay. So the word training and the word education. I want to put one word in front of both those words, and then I want you to think about the consequences of not understanding the difference between education and training. And the word is sex. So in the morning, my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, is going to go and have sex education. And then in the afternoon, she's going to go and have sex training.
I'd be pulling her out of school halfway through the day.
So this learned professor looks at me and she said, I don't think that's a particularly good example to use, Colin. I think that's, it's a very politically incorrect statement that I've clearly made, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, take it or leave it,
Yeah.
And I'm not sure she wanted me to apologise, but to me, other people around the room were going, yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying these things overlap, but we need to understand what are we educating for and what are we training for?
Yeah.
We know that they interact with each other, but these are two very different things, right? Mm-hmm. In my world, in entrepreneurship, they are very different things. So I always err on the side of trying to sort of, as you know, have this lightheartedness in the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes people might think he doesn't take this seriously, right? So participation in these types of events enables you to pull back.
Yeah. And be taken seriously. So besides coming to a theory on sex education and sex training, has your participation in PPOP for awards led to any professional outcomes that were unintended when you decided to participate in the work?
Well, I think what's been happening in the UK with the work I've been doing at Liverpool John Moores University, that was very unexpected. My mate wanted me to go and talk to them about a range of different things, but the conversation essentially came back to teaching philosophies. And, at the moment, I have a very sort of standard way of starting a presentation. I basically challenge the audience. I did it just recently here in Brisbane a couple of weeks ago, and I say, I suspect most of the people in the audience, how many of you have been to university? Yeah, how many? Most of them got teaching degrees or whatever it is. I suspect the majority of you are uneducated. And so you can imagine how that works, right? And then I give them my explanation of what being educated is, right? And I won't bore you with it now, but it's from something Ruskin said 100 years ago. I'll tell you anyway. He just said, the education of a man can be reduced to 3 questions. Does he know where he is? Does he know where he's going? And does he know what he needs to know in order to make that journey happen? To the extent you could answer the 3 questions, you're educated. To the extent you couldn't, you're uneducated. And so rather than viewing education as this thing we attain, so you got a teaching degree in 1982, therefore you're educated, seeing it as something that just relates to your need to navigate your journeys in life, and do you know where you're going? And when you start having these conversations with people, you get really deep into their orientation to life and how that relates to their teaching philosophy. I do a lot of stuff with, I'm not sure if you read Courage to Teach.
No.
Well, there you go. Go and get this book. Okay. It'll be in the UTAS library. Yep. This is by far the best teaching book in the world.
Really?
Got to get the 1997 version though. The other versions are different takes of it. But this book, it's quite an amazing book. And so it's all about selfhood. It's all about your identity. Who are you? And basically the general message of the book is we teach who we are.
Yeah. Okay.
Can't reduce it to technique. It's we teach who we are. And, it's just such a beautiful book. And I'm always working with Parker J. Palmer's ideas. It's just a constant process of and going back to it. I've got it on my phone so I can actually listen to his voice. I've got the book. I'm just constantly working with it, and I'm constantly sharing it with other people.
Yep.
Because people are like, wow. I mean, it's an emancipatory experience. And if anything, coming back to your question, I think that that's a part of the realization.
Yeah.
All of this should be an emancipatory experience. So it's not what's my reward. It should be what can this journey unfold for me? If I start thinking about who I am and why do I do what I do and how might I demonstrate that, then everyone else should fill their boots with confidence as well and more mindfulness. And it should allow everybody, the mentors, the mentees, to be more confident in their space, to understand who they are. And this idea of selfhood is just such a powerful thing, and we ignore it. Right? And I think when I go and do the work I do in the UK, these are the things that we talk about. And these are the things that the people in the audience who have been bashed around by teaching, changes and resource withdrawals and all these sorts of things, that's what I got into it for. That's why I do it. That's what makes me happy. If only my students could understand who I am as an individual. So there's like a constant renewal process, I think, that goes on, which is sort of naturally born from this continually evolving thing. And if I had to guess, maybe I'm 30% the way into whoever I am as an educator.
Yeah.
And hopefully I get to the end of it. I don't know. but I don't see myself as actually having worked it all out.
Yeah.
I think I'm quite effective, but not for everybody, but for some. But I know this journey keeps going. And I think part of the reason I can be useful to people is because they see me as I'm in the same journey, parallel place. I might just be a little bit further down the track.
Yeah.
I'm doing exactly what they're doing in terms of trying to make sense of things. I might have made sense of them, but then how do you communicate it?
Yeah.
I might have made sense of it. I can communicate it, but how do I evidence it?
Yeah.
Right. And so that constant process. And then as soon as you get down to there and you think, oh, why don't I do this? Then you have to start the process all over again. Right. This is, the stuff where at the moment we do pedagogical learning. So that's really big, and that's self-determined learning. So it's like, how do we get the students themselves to start the process? What are you passionate about? What are you interested in? So again, it's a whole new starting point.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, mate, I'm paying you $2,000. Why don't you just teach me what I need to know? Right? And I'm like, well, I can't teach you what you need to know until I know where you want to go.
Yeah.
Mate, I don't want to go anywhere. I don't even want to come to your class. You've got all of that negativity amongst all the powerful stuff too. But so, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps up my questions. Do you have any other thoughts or comments that you would like me to know in relation to the program?
No, I think other than what I mentioned before, I think there should be something that mirrors a HI index. And it could be just what I just said then.
A selfhood index.
A selfhood index, or how far have you traveled index, something that, I don't know, but it's almost like the reverse. Instead of saying, well, look at the way I'm stacking these papers up this way.
Yeah.
It's like, look how far I've traveled into understanding my orientation. Because if you think about something like in maths and science, they have pedagogical content knowledge as quite a neat little piece of literature. But if you look at that, and I've had a conversation with Shirley Magnuson, who created the most commonly used framework, and I said to her, I think when people write about this, they just jump straight to the teaching philosophy and they miss the bit before it, which is your orientation to life.
Yeah.
Right? And it's almost like, oh yeah, but I live this life over here and then I come to work. But it's actually, no, who are you and it's exactly what Parker J. Palmer says, we teach who we are.
Mm.
And I think if these types of programs had the ability to create this we say that research processes, you get more and more citations on your work, and it grows and it grows and grows. So there's this centrifugal force, right? So it just throws it. The further you go, the more it throws this thing out. So we want the opposite, which is centripetal force. So centripetal force means like the water that goes into the sink, right? So we want it to go the other way. The more you do, the more it narrows itself down. And so it would be really cool if these types of programs, this is an external recognition thing happening there, but if it was actually a starting point of saying, well, whether you get recognized or not, we actually wanted you to start this personal journey, this centripetal motion, which just brings you closer and closer and closer to your underlying core, your identity. Who are you? What are you doing here? Right? And that journey, I think, is the thing that universities should be, heaven forbid, recognizing such scholarly thinking. But
we're 30% on the path.
30%, I don't know. Who knows? I mean, maybe I'm only 5%. It's scary to think that through. But yeah, I don't think you could say you're there, because if I look at all the publications that I've written from 2002 to now, if someone picked up my 2002 paper, or 4 or 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 or 14 or 16 or 17, they're going to say, shit, you obviously must have made a journey across these things. But what you said then, it's sort of consistent, but it's very, very shallow in terms of here. I mean, so you're not really saying the world should look like that, but now you're saying it should look like that. But you thought the world looked like this, but then you realize that actually there's another layer. So it's like this onion that just every year there's another layer keeps coming off until eventually you get down to something instead of say, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It needs that before. So that'd be my only suggestion, is that it's the start of a process, not the culmination. If it's a recognition, then we're trying to recognize the process that someone's been doing.
Yep.
But actually it could be by starting this process, there's a bit over there that hangs out over there that you could get a pat on the back for, but actually we really want you to start doing this.
Yeah.
But that assumes you've got a community of like-minded people like Kerry Howes, who just enjoy talking, about people. I've never heard Kerry ever get annoyed with students.
Yeah.
I've never heard her say, oh, those bloody students.
Yeah.
She sees them changing. She sees they're not being fully engaged or whatever the case may be. But she's got her eye on a bigger picture, which is really this transcending.
Yeah.
The work that's really interesting is Tobin Hart's. So Tobin Hart's, he's got a book called From Information to Transformation. You could take the framework that he has on how you get from information to knowledge to understanding to something else, ultimately to wisdom. But that process, so rather than moving on, he says we've got to move in. And that process means that ultimately you get this wisdom. So if I get given an award, does that mean I've got wisdom, or does that mean I got lucky in the context of putting in and being able to demonstrate my evidence? But did you ever watch the last lecture?
No.
So if you've got time, put your daughter in bed and just watch the last lecture. The last lecture, you'll find it on YouTube or anywhere like that. So about 5 years ago, this guy, Randy Pausch, he died. He's Carnegie Mellon computer science type of guy. And they have a thing every year called the last lecture. And it's like, if you were going to give your last lecture, what would you do it on? So not some bullshit thing, but what would you do it on? And as it turns out, he was dying. He had pancreatic cancer. And so he gives the last lecture, which is now a book and a whole range of things, but you can watch it online. And through this, he talks about what he used to get his students to do. And one of the things that he built his curriculum around was this notion of a head fake. So you wanted your students to know this, but the only way to get them to know this was to get them to go over and do that. And then they had this really neat thing to reflect back on. And I think it would be really cool if this type of program was ultimately the starting point for a head fake. We want you to get you in here when we start this conversation. We want to start to get you really reflecting all this. And as a result of that, you're going to get this other thing, which is so much more valuable than any award you would ever receive, because of the level of confidence and all the other things that go, which make you 10 times a better teacher than what you ever got recognised for.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but that also assumes the institution values teachers.
Yeah, it does.
There's other conversations around those things, isn't there? So, which, you know, in the age of online teaching and all those other challenges, it's sort of that in itself is another PhD for someone else.
You can supervise them. Oh, cool. Well, that's awesome, Colin. Thank you. You can hit stop if you want to.
Okay.